Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Good day, everybody. My name is Alex Prout. I'm the founder of I Have the Right To. It is a Washington, D.C. based 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we founded this organization 7 years ago as a result of our daughter's sexual assault. I'm the father of 3 daughters. My middle daughter, Chessie, was a student at the St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, was sexually assaulted as part of a ritualized game called the Senior Salute. And through her experience of her trauma, we learned what every survivor faces as a result of their victimization. And as a result, we set up our organization to help survivors. And our mission has morphed and evolved over the years. And I'm very excited today because we're at our inaugural podcast on aspirational masculinity. And one of the things on my journey of healing from my daughter's trauma and trying to learn how to make an impact on the world was not only supporting survivors and speaking out and raising awareness, but I found the biggest mission was how to speak to our young men. How do we speak to our young men from multiple perspectives? Because as hopefully everyone knows, boys and men are also victims of sexual violence. The data on girls is 1 in 4, but the data on boys is equally at epidemic proportions. It's 1 in 6. So young men are impacted by this crime. But also, unfortunately, many of our young people are impacted by, I think, the air that we breathe in our society. And working with these 2 young men that I'm going to introduce has given me hope that there's opportunities for us to have real conversations about real topics, about our culture, about our values, about how we want to be the best versions of ourselves. And I'm super excited to introduce this concept to everyone. So we're going to be speaking about aspirational masculinity. We'll get into that in a little bit. But in the meantime, I wanted to turn it over to my 2 co-hosts for this podcast, Gabriel Viscogliosi and Hugh Eastman. I will continue practicing that, Gabriel, so I don't mess it up. But Gabriel, why don't I turn it over to you first?
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Viscogliosi, and I'm a high schooler in the New York area. So I started my journey with aspirational masculinity and this whole idea that we will be talking about on this podcast last fall when I went to the Georgetown Day School Consent Summit in Washington, D.C. It was an opportunity that I was given through my class, that one of the organizations that I was in school. But through that day in the Consent Summit, I learned lots of interesting things, and I really learned how important it is that everyone, especially high schoolers, who is a main root of the problem, learn how to speak out about issues of consent and sexual violence, and really learn how, especially us men and young men, we have to learn how to stop sexual assault and sexual violence at the root, which is this idea of aspirational masculinity, which we'll be talking about. And aspirational masculinity comes from the idea that men should just be men, and there's this macho idea of men who don't show any emotions and can't tell anyone how they really feel. But in this podcast, we'll learn how to break this down and really break down these barriers and show everyone what it means to be an actual real man, and how even as teenagers, we can inspire others and teach others about this new way of masculinity called aspirational masculinity instead of socially constructed masculinity.
Great. Thank you, Gabriel. And now I'll turn it over to Hugh.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hugh Eastman. I'm also a rising junior in the New York City area. And I have a very similar story to Gabriel. In my freshman year of high school, it was a new school that I enrolled in. And immediately I joined a group called Boys Leading Boys in the fall of freshman year, purely just out of the fact that a lot of my friends mentioned it to me and they thought that it'd be a nice club or bonding experience just as boys at our co-ed school. And so I joined that group in freshman year. I worked for all of freshman year in that club, whether it be listening to certain lectures, speakers, slideshows, and all of that kind of stuff. But my interest really spiked around this topic at the same time as Gabriel when I was allowed for, or when I got the opportunity to go to the Georgetown Day School Consent Summit in Washington, D.C. And my school offered this, and Gabriel and I were two of four boys went on this trip, which I think speaks mountains because I think boys aren't as educated on this topic, and I think that's part of why we continue to and we strive to raise awareness for this subject. And during that summit, I attended Alex's class on aspirational masculinity, and I was very touched by it because it was a new topic to me. I had heard of in BLB, I'd heard of parts of it, but never a full definition or full categorization of what it really means to be a real man and not, as Gabriel was talking about, how to be this macho figure that we refer to as socially constructed masculinity, because that I think actually puts men and boys down and rather than lifting them up, which is where aspirational masculinity comes in because it gives them a place or a goal to strive for and to aspire to be. And I think that will give many young boys and men motivation to, express their true selves and break that barrier of socially constructed masculinity that holds them back from vulnerability and full expression of emotions. And I think after that summit, I really started to dive into this topic, and I'm very excited to continue sharing with you guys my thoughts on it and hopefully make a change in the world as soon as possible.
Well, thank you guys. And I'd like our audience to really understand that we have two 16-year-old young men here today. So I feel so fortunate, guys, and thank you very much for joining me in this effort and for your leadership on this topic, because this is such an opportunity to hear two young men who are in the middle of the storm that a lot of us are reading about. There are many books out this summer on the plight of boys in our society today. And I'd love to dive into that right away and get your perspectives on a word that, Hugh, you used, toxic masculinity. And you had mentioned that we are trying to rephrase that term, but explain to me what is toxic masculinity from your guys' perspective and why you feel it has such a negative connotation to just the term itself.
Toxic masculinity is exactly, I think most people can picture in their head this dominant, aggressive figure who stays emotionless and controlling and dominant over every situation, whether it be in their family or in a business setting or whatever it is. And I think that the reason why we'd like to rephrase this term, as I said, to socially constructed masculinity is honestly because I think nobody is toxic at their core. And I think that this is a concept that has been fully constructed by society. It's not biological at all. I don't think anybody is wanting to hide who they really are, hide their emotions. And I think that we really need to push past that. And I think by viewing it as socially constructed masculinity rather than toxic masculinity, people will start to have a vision in their head about how this is really not who they are at their core, and it's really what society has set them up as. And I think that aspirational masculinity is a great term to motivate young men and boys towards breaking that barrier down and aspiring to be who they really are.
So I really like that the positivity of that statement that you just made, Hugh, and I actually wrote that down. So I think that's a wonderful way to look at it. But Gabriel, in what ways do you find socially constructed masculinity, toxic masculinity, inhibiting? Because when you introduced yourself, you talked about the importance of speaking out, which seems to infer that speaking out is not the norm, and possibly silence is more the norm, especially around the topics that we're talking about. But how does toxic masculinity or socially constructed masculinity inhibit dialogue or discussions?
Well, I think that can happen in a multitude of ways. The first, I think I've experienced it, and I think amongst my friends, we've experienced it as well. This whole idea of toxic masculinity can be seen, especially in teenagers and at this high school level, when you want to speak out against what someone else has to say, but you feel like you can't because there's this idea that you're not allowed to show your true emotions and you're not allowed to say, oh no, you shouldn't have said that, like trying to speak out against this common norm because this idea that all these other people have this socially constructed masculinity and this toxic masculinity that's taught them to shut other people down. And so when one singular person has this one chance to be this aspirational man and use this aspirational masculinity, it gets really hard for them because they often get shut down because the mass amount of people often have this idea of socially constructed masculinity, which shuns out the one, which is
So,
why for a long time, socially constructed masculinity has been so successful and has been taking over all many generations.
so you said something interesting. When you say it shuts you down, that's really coming from within, correct? It's not anyone actively saying, don't you say anything, right? Don't respond to this. But it's more coming from within, right? Do you have, and this could go for both of you guys, do you have some examples, even from within
Yeah.
your own experiences?
So my thought on that was when Gabriel mentioned common norms or that kind of categorization aspect, that made me think of certain things that boys aren't allowed to do in society or girls aren't allowed to do in society. For example, boys are blue and girls are pink, and boys can never wear pink. Or that just that idea of categorization really, or that reminded me of those certain categories that society has set up. And in terms of an experience from within, I think that I can't cite a specific experience, but there have been many. For example, I have not been able maybe to say, oh, I'm watching this movie or this show because it's too girly or you know what I mean? So I think that
So what would happen to you, Hugh, if you said I
people
watched
say
Barbie, or
that's so gay or why are you doing that? Because that's just not. And it really, I think you're very right about the fact that it comes from within because no one's telling you to, if you're like, I watch Barbie, nobody's telling you like right after. You're thinking of before you're thinking of saying, oh, what if I say I watch Barbie? I know I'm going to get backlash from that. So, and the fact that it comes from within just shows how much society has ingrained it into each young man, each boy to perform in a certain way.
And just adding on to Hugh, I agree totally with what you said. And I think often many kids who have this same idea of, oh, I can't tell people I've watched this, or I can't wear this, or I can't listen to the song, whatever. It's often many people have the same thoughts, but they're too scared to individually come out and say it because they think that they'll get backlash. But I believe once one person comes out and says, "Oh, I watched this movie," then other people will also admit that that they watched the movie, and then other people realize there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just like a movie or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's just that one link that once one person breaks through the ice and really shows everyone that it's okay, I think many more people will follow and join it. It just many people are too scared to really take that jump and be that leader. But I think Hugh and I are confident that we can be those leaders and really establish that push through the center for our generation.
And which is a wonderful sentiment, and I applaud you guys. But you've mentioned some words that would cause me some concern, right? In terms of scared and scared of backlash. And what I think would be very helpful for our audience to hear is, why is that the norm, right? Why do you guys feel like, you said two words, Hugh, in terms of, oh, if I admitted I watched Barbie or another movie like that, that I would be called girly or gay. That obviously is inflammatory language in the socially constructed version of masculinity, right? And I will do a plug here for one of my very good friends, Don McPherson, who wrote a wonderful book, You Throw a Girl, The Blind Spot of Masculinity. Don has been my mentor in terms of aspirational masculinity journey. And in his book, he very clearly calls out the very worst thing to call another boy or man is a girl, right? If you think about a lot of the insults that get thrown around in locker rooms or on the sports field or in the school hallways. Oh, you throw like a girl, you run like a girl. That's the last thing you want to be called, or to be called in any way effeminate. And how do you guys feel? Is that still a current reality in your guys' world as high schoolers?
I think it is, but I think as we've all gotten older and as the grades have progressed, I feel like people have matured and realized that it's not really these set in stones ideals of what you can and can't be. And more people are pushing back against these socially constructed ideas of masculinity and what you can and can't do or can and can't wear and whatever and things like that. But I think there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made within that area. But the older people get, they will just realize that it's okay and no one has the right to judge you for what you wear or what you do, and it's your own ideas of what you want to do.
I think also there's subcategories to what you just mentioned now. It's not just, I think it's evolved from not just boy girl categories. I think that people have separated it into like gay, weird, nerd. So if you do certain things, people assume that you're in one of those categories, which just is not fair at all because everybody's their own different person and nobody's just going to fall into the exact same category as everyone else. So
Now,
I,
I understand that is the reality, Hugh, but I do have three daughters, one who's still a teenager,
right,
and I see social media, and it seems like there's still established norms that are trying to guide, at least the norms on social media, from my old guy's perspective, trying to guide people towards being viewed as beautiful, as successful, as
right,
going on beautiful trips and doing all these fantastic things. And so there's, again, I'm hopeful with the words that you're saying, but in your daily life, right, and I love those three, the categories, gay, weird, or nerd. Those terms are represent reality of people, yet they're told not to look or be that way on social media, right?
right.
And so how do you balance out those pressures in real life, at school, or out with friends on a weekend?
I think also just adding on one more group of people, I think the group of normal, so like everyone is normal except for those groups. So it puts that idea of being an outsider. Not only are those groups different, but it also makes you an outsider if you're a part of that group. So it confines people to do anything they can to stay inside of that normal group and not really push back or push against any boundaries because they don't want to just be seen as as an outsider. And I think in our day-to-day life and like when we're going out with our friends, people will try to maybe not do something that will make them be seen as an outsider, just conform to what everyone else is doing. But I think, especially over this past year and a half, I think Hugh and I have both kind of taken what we've learned and realized how important it is to, even with small action, to really push back and to make it so every small thing that's not acceptable, we see and we say that it's not acceptable. And I think those small actions are important to make it so it's not one group of normal and the rest are just weird or gay or nerds.
Yeah. I completely agree with Gabriel. And to answer your question about how do I deal with it in my day-to-day life, I think that sometimes it's honestly really hard to completely break that barrier in every setting, just because it's really how you grow up and how people perceive everyone around you. And I agree with Gabriel. I think in the past, I think I have really grown to express my true self and how I feel about almost every issue. But there are obviously times where I'm held back still by those barriers, which is just crazy to think about considering the fact that I've had so many conversations about this kind of stuff and the importance of self-expression. And it is a sad reality. And I think it does take a lot of time, but I think I'm making good progress. I think Gabriel's making good progress. And I think that the world will be able to make good progress. So,
Or it sounds like what you're talking about, Hugh, is also just then checking yourself, being
yeah,
self-aware.
right. Yeah. So whether it be the clothes I wear, the music I listen to, sometimes even those superficial aspects hold me back just because of that categorization between either boy or girl, nerd, normal, you
Right.
know. So that's my perspective on it. And I think it's just such a hard issue, but I am optimistic about the future.
Before you check yourself, I think what we're really talking about is also possibly some of the wiring that you've absorbed growing up, right? And that can come from so many different sources, right? As
Hmm.
teenagers, it can come from social media, from the internet, etc. It can come from classmates at school. But as, again, school-age kids, you still spend quite a bit of time at home. So let's talk about the role that parents play in all of this in terms of model setting, right? I can tell you as a dad of three daughters, I was not as self-aware as you guys were in terms of checking myself. Many times, still to this day, I'm still checked by my daughters when I make a comment that might seem inappropriate from their perspective. And honestly, I don't think twice about it until they say something, and then I say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that, right? But and that's why I talk a lot about the air that we breathe. It is something that I feel the older generation has responsibility for, obviously a lot of the attitudes that exist today. But do you guys have anything that you can look at and say reasons for things that you need to check yourself, or reasons why you think you guys can think this way in terms of wanting to lead and change things?
Well, I think personally that parents have one of, if not the biggest impact on kind of you, like your masculinity or socially constructed masculinity or aspirational masculinity and how you think like what a boy should be and what a girl should be. Because they are the people who raise you when you're born all the way to like you're a teen and even till you get to college. And they are the people who are buying you things and buying you gifts and giving you the clothes to wear. And if they only give you clothes that are colored blue and never give you any clothes that are colored pink, then you'll think, oh, boys don't wear pink, so why should I? I've never worn anything pink. And it all comes from the parents' mentality of what it means to be a boy. And if they only show you sports and they only tell you these things, it'll be ingrained into your head since you're at such a young age and such a developing age that these things that your parents tell you are the only things you know how to think. And they're the only ways and they're the only opinions that are formed are from your parents. So
Yeah.
at this age where your brain is developing at such a fast rate, the information and opinions that you get from your parents are, I believe, one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful way that kind of shifts your idea about masculinity.
I completely agree about the fact that how certain things are set out for you, whether it be clothes or opinions or just anything in general about the topic of masculinity. I think that obviously plays such a big role. And also, I think one of the biggest things is that every, I'd say almost every kid looks up to their parents as some of their biggest role models, at least in their younger years or throughout their whole life, even. And I think that if, in ways, if your parent says a certain thing, you will most likely, in your younger years, you will most likely agree with it just because it's how kids are brought up and just biologically.
Well, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit because we talked a little bit about socially constructed masculinity, what that is. I'd love to dive into the flip side of that. The audience has heard the term aspirational masculinity quite a bit here in our time together. Would love to dive into your thoughts about the definition of aspirational masculinity. What is it?
Aspirational masculinity, it's this idea that encourages men to embrace the qualities of like respect and empathy and instead not shy away from, but don't let those ideas of the macho man and not showing emotions, but instead the reverse and being able to show emotions and not just being able to show emotions, but also strive to be the best version of yourself, no matter what that version is, and don't let the confines of toxic masculinity shape what your best version is, and instead use these really qualities of empathy and integrity to shape what your best self is. And I think that's a main idea of aspirational masculinity.
So Gabriel, talk to me a little bit more about this concept of showing emotions, right? Because in many cases, again, I'm the father of three girls, but I've seen young men at sporting events or other outlets show, significant emotions. Typically, the manifestations are arguments or fights, etc. What is it that you're talking about when you're talking about the inability to show emotions?
So I think within these emotions, some men are supposed to be angry. So they are supposed to feel some emotions and show some emotions, but those emotions that they are supposed to show are very limited to that set of is like hard struck, angry, emotional in a bad way man. Instead, men should be allowed to show emotions in a variety of ways, such as like sadness, happiness, just like being vulnerable. Every single way they should be able to express their emotions, no matter what emotion it is, if it's happy or sad. And they shouldn't be limited, just they should always be angry, but they should be allowed to express a multitude of emotions.
So what you're saying is really along the sayings of that that saying that says real men don't cry. So how do you respond to that sort of saying that's out there?
Well, I would actually say the opposite. Real men do cry.
Mhm.
And I think real man, if you don't cry, then I would say you're not a real man, if anything, because I think by being a real man, you're showing your true emotions and you're allowing yourself to feel all of your emotions. And by suppressing emotions, that's holding back what like the true man you are. So by being a true man and a real man, you can express all of your emotions, and it's okay to cry or to show any emotion that you're feeling because that's how you're truly feeling.
Yeah, really just adding on to Gabriel, if I had to define aspirational masculinity, I think it'd just be like that full range of emotional expression. And Gabriel mentioned that quote unquote real man or real men are confined to certain emotions like anger and that aggressive state, whereas aspirational masculinity strives for men to express their full array of emotions and also just to be themselves in every moment. So,
But aren't real men aggressive, domineering? That seems to be the image that we see in movies, in social media, etc.
right. And that is only because society has set it up like that. Just because, and we mentioned socially constructed masculinity, that is how someone in society decided that is the norm to be dominant and aggressive. And it set off a whole chain. And once somebody hid their emotions, society constructed that image and that norm for men.
But wouldn't it, some say it's in our human nature, men, because we evolved from the caveman, where men had to be the provider, men had to be the one who went out and hunted, and men would have to protect the village from attack, from all sorts of dangers out there. Isn't that sort of the natural being of men?
Well, I would say it's not really the natural being. I think that just shows how far back these ideas of socially constructed masculinity go. And that's why we call it socially constructed masculinity, because even all the way back then, it's still constructed by society. It wasn't like ingrained. There's no scientific data that says, oh, men have to do this. It's ingrained by society that's changed this. And that's why we don't use the term toxic masculinity, because it's not some real thing that's every man is a toxic man. It's this idea of socially constructed masculinity. And that's why it's so hard for this idea to be changed from socially constructed masculinity because it's ingrained in all of society. But I think especially with just this generation, our generation, we're seeing a lot of change already. And I think we're the generation that can really spur this change to change these societal norms and make it so being a real man is this aspirational masculinity and not the socially constructed masculinity we've been living with.
Okay, well, yep, I understand that. Hugh, go
Oh,
ahead.
adding on, I think that the fact that people promote the that image of a real man as dominant and aggressive, and Gabriel mentioned the fact that it dates back to those caveman years. It's embarrassing to the people that for the people that are spreading that image or that idea, just because why would you want to be a caveman in a society that has evolved or has been evolving for thousands of years? So why would you want to go back to that state and stay in that Neanderthal like nature rather than being the humans we are today and expressing
So,
what
so,
what we really are?
so what are some of the things that make us, and let's focus on that word human, because I think
Yeah.
that almost neutralizes it, right? And opens up more conversations. Because almost when you say, when we're a man, we almost automatically tilt towards that old Neanderthal version. I'm using your
Right.
words. Um, so if you're being more fully human, what kind of emotions, let's stick on just the emotions thing, what kind of emotions are we talking about?
I think that rather than just anger and dominance, I think that includes sadness, vulnerability, openness, kindness, care for others. And I think that those are really natural emotions of humans. And the fact that people want to hide those just because they think that it is what a quote unquote real man is just shows that that's not really what a real man is, because every human has felt every emotion that I just listed. And how could a real man be, or quote unquote real man, if they only show one or two out of that list of emotions?
So if I could ask a probing question, I'll ask myself this as well. When was the last time you cried? For me, it was 2 days ago in my car while driving my youngest daughter, who's 18 and off to college. And I had this realization. I've been driving her, she doesn't have her driver's license, so I've been driving her to and from school and to, I was about to say play dates, but gosh, I would get killed, but to outings with friends.
Mhm.
And I've grown to cherish the time together in the car, just physical time together, time to catch up, time to listen to music together, laugh, cry, whatever. And I got overwhelmed a bit with sadness, realizing she's leaving for college in 2 weeks. And I'm going to lose that part of my relationship with her. And the song was on, and music is what sometimes triggers me for thinking really sad. My kids know that I can almost cry on demand listening to particular songs. It was automatic. The tears flowed, profound sadness, but it felt so good on so many levels. Number one, it was a release because obviously this emotion had been pent up inside of me. So I felt just like a rushing release of that pent up emotion, which felt good. Number
Mhm.
two, it built a bridge of closeness to my daughter. She saw me and me feeling comfortable enough in our relationship to be so vulnerable, to let myself show my emotions, that she immediately reached over and grabbed my hand. And that feeling of that physical connection was just a reaffirmation of our relationship and the strength of it, right?
Mhm.
Um, which just filled me with a certain amount of joy, love, warm feelings. So it was interesting through that act of crying, it was a release, but also a very profound connection event. And then it opened up an opportunity for us to have a deep discussion about life in school, how she's feeling about leaving home, and created that opportunity for a deeper conversation.
Yeah,
That's me.
I actually just remembered. So I rewatched the movie A Dog's Purpose two weeks ago
Oh
with
my gosh, that is
my
such a
mom.
tearjerker.
It is really, and so I did end up crying because it made me think a little bit that my dog is getting older, and he's almost 8 years old, and the life expectancy of his breed is about 10 to 12 years old. So I realized that I only have a couple more solid years with him, and that I really have to make the most of it because, and I love my dog so much. I've loved him from the moment I saw him on petfinder.com, where I found him
Mm.
and where I forced my family to adopt him. And so that was the most recent time when I cried. And I think that I do have a time coming up in about 11 days where I will cry next, because that's the day my sister leaves for college and where
Mhm.
I drop her off. So I think that's coming. And I think that it's very important to know that it is normal to cry at, whether it be a dog's purpose or, like you said, your relationship with your own daughter shifting or my relationship with my sister shifting. And I think it's important to know that it's normal to cry in those moments rather than shutting it down or,
And
right.
from a sociological perspective, I don't want to get too academic here, but again, I imagine there was a release for you when you cried during a dog's purpose. Um, but what do you think it did for the people around you?
I think, well, so it was just my mom and I watching the movie at home, but I think that her seeing me crying, she's obviously seen me cry from when I was younger until now. I think she
But
realized
now you're a 16-year-old tough young man,
that's
right?
17,
17, sorry.
even tougher actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a difference, and I think that probably reminded her of the fact that I'm still me and I'm never gonna shut out how I feel about something. And yeah, I think that reminded also to me that reminded me of how close my connection is to my own mother and how there are not actually a lot of people in the world can who I can physically cry in front of. And it's not really a socially constructed masculinity thing. It's more of just it's natural. I think when you get to that moment when you become so close to someone where you can just cry right in front of them. And yeah, I just that definitely reminded her of probably me when I was younger or and to me that reminded me of how close our connection is.
And
And
I
one last question, Gabriel, sorry. And I'll pick up something there. If you were watching it with three buddies,
Yeah.
would you have been like trying to like hide the tears, or do you
I
think you might
actually
not have cried?
it might have been yeah, I think it might have been different. I think it might have been like how I was talking about, and this is a little bit contradictory, but how I was talking about the fact that, and this kind of is only, or to me, this is for crying specifically. But I think it honestly would have been hard to cry in front of my friends, even though I'm so close to them. I think it's just a different kind of relationship that I have with them. Um, but I don't know. It depends. I'd have to see, like, I've never tested that, but
Well,
I have been able to cry in front of my friends before, just in those moments where you become very vulnerable, but and you just open up and cry. And to me, that just shows the extent of my relationship with either my mom or some of my good friends. So,
mhm.
yeah, it's a hard question to think about. It's like it's a hard hypothetical, but I think it would be different, sadly, which I'm not sure is almost a natural thing or
It's more
yeah,
like you've got some of the armor still on,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome stuff. Thanks. Thanks for sharing honestly. Gabriel.
So I this is not the most recent time I've cried, but I would just say, along with what Hugh said, so I have also cried in front of my friends before, and just having a really in-depth conversation with them about like things going on outside of school and just whatever, all of that. There's a lot of like deep personal stuff that I haven't really shared with even if they're really close friends before. And I think crying and with them and being for seeing how they were able to be there for me and console me, and seeing how they weren't judging me when I cried, really I think broke that barrier of, for me, experiencing how it's not bad to cry in front of like friends or something. Like they're not going to judge you. It's not this idea of real men don't cry. Like your true friends, like they will be there for you. They will have your back and they'll be there for you and support you.
So at the moment when you did cry, was there a feeling of what were you feeling inside?
Well, it was just, I feel like a whole heap of emotions that was all built up. And honestly, I think a little bit of nervousness, like what their reactions was gonna be, like how were they gonna react, but just seeing their support and being able to like be with them, I think really just helped me understand that it's okay to cry. And I think it just established another level of kind of trust and like connection in our friendships. And I think being able to cry with someone is, as Hugh said, one that area when you're really close with someone. But once you do that, I feel like you break down that one barrier of kind of some wall that's there, even if it's an invisible wall that's barely poking out. Once you cry, I think it really breaks down the barrier and it really allows you to be truly vulnerable with someone else.
Well, guys, we have covered a lot of ground here, but at the same time feel like we're just beginning to barely touch on the topic of aspirational masculinity. But one thing I feel confident of after our first podcast here is that real men do cry.
Yep.
And I appreciate you sharing, because what I heard from you guys were expressions of fear in even just speaking about crying, let alone crying, and vulnerability. And there's a lot of baggage there from a socially constructed definition of a real man, right? Because you guys shared crossing a line into aspirational masculinity there with maybe not even realizing it, right? Because what I saw through what you expressed to me was strength and courage, trust, and love. And these are things that are so important for us as human beings, but especially for us as men, because we are denied so much of that emotion and feeling by when we go out into the sports field, when we go out into the classroom, out on a Saturday night, right? And I look forward to many more discussions like this, where we can relay some of these, I think, real experiences to our audience, and then hopefully get feedback and stories from them that we can discuss, on air here now. But before we sign off, any last messages from either of you or both of you?
I would just like to say thank you everyone for listening to our first episode. And in the coming episodes, we'll discuss a lot more aspects of aspirational masculinity and how they cover many aspects of life, whether it's social media or mental health, many different aspects that we'll all cover. And thank you for coming on this journey with us, everyone. And we hope we inspire many of you.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the real men do cry, because I think that phrase defines what aspirational masculinity is, in the fact that real men can express their true emotions. I'm really excited to continue talking about how aspirational masculinity or socially constructed masculinity comes into play in different settings, and continue speaking and learning about it. And thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcasts on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.